Welcome back, everyone. The Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has given 1 month moratorium to traders and other market stakeholders involved in exploitative pricing to crash the prices of goods. The newly appointed Executive Vice Chairman of the Commission, Mr. Tunji Bello, said this at a one-day stakeholders engagement on exploitative pricing on Thursday in Abuja. And according to him, the Commission will begin enforcement after the moratorium. But how far can this go in addressing the unreasonable pricing of consumer goods in the market? Tonight, let's speak with Kayode Oyedeji, an economist, for his perspectives on this latest developments. Mr. Oyedeji, good evening to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on Politics Tonight.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
Right, so I want us to start with the way the present administration is running the economy. What's your impression about it?
Well, I've always said that there are very few options. The government has found itself in a very tight corner. The government has embarked on far-reaching reform efforts, which, if well implemented, we are optimistic that we'll get good results from them. But it requires a lot of work, a lot of efforts, a lot of commitment, a lot of sacrifice. It is what is going to task the resilience of government and citizens. So government is trying its best. Whether that best is good enough is another thing. But obviously, we have a long way to go. From what we've seen recently, the economy grew by 3.19% in Q2. And we hope government will be able to do a lot much more to sustain that tempo and even improve on the result we have in the first half of the year, so that the benefit of this growth will trickle down to the average man on the streets. So for now, there's a lot to be done. There are very few options before government. We have to continue with tightening our belts, but that has to come from the top, and that has to go from the top to the bottom, from government in particular to the citizens. So these are the issues. But in terms of government efforts, we are beginning to assume or feel that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and things are likely to begin to look up, judging by the report we have recently from the Bureau of Statistics.
Talking about reports, at 40.87%, food inflation in Nigeria reached its highest level in the past 25 years this year. But recent reports indicate a decline to about 39.53% in July 2024. So are we getting there?
Well, historically, when you get to the Q2 of every year and Q3, food inflation is always on a decline because you have massive food harvest in the second. It begins to come in. That begins to come in the second quarter, and also in the third quarter, then down to the last quarter. And also we expect that trend to be sustained. And in fairness to this government, they are putting more efforts, more vigor into enhancing food production, and they are beginning to have the buy-in of various tiers of the other tiers of government. But for instance, it's been well publicized that Niger State government is creating a huge agricultural hub in that state. They are targeting 250 hectares of land, which is a record as far as Nigeria is concerned. And I think other states are following suit. Ogun State is trying to improve on its rice production. Kwara State is trying to double its soya beans production. Even states like Osun State are beginning to say, no, we have to go back to agriculture. So this would impact positively on food production in the second and the third quarter. And I assume that tempo will be sustained so that we have a very good run into the new year. We have good storage, because when we have massive harvests like this, the challenge is how to protect, to preserve what we have. So I assume government will begin to think about how to have good harvest and how to preserve it. Well, talking about good harvest, we've had a bit of drought in the year, about 3 weeks, 1 month plus or two, a little more than 1 month of drought, poor rainfall in the West in particular. We hope that's the work of nature, that God will be benevolent to us and we'll have a change of that. We'll have it smooth for the rest of the year. So if you're able to do that one, we are going to have reasonably good harvest, higher than what we have in the past, because government is putting a lot more into getting our fertilizer across to the people, investing more in mechanized agriculture, investing more in empowering farmers through different programs, and of course, imploring states, the subnationals, to also invest more into agriculture.
So we hope when it comes to mechanized agriculture, Mr. Oyedeji, is government doing enough?
There can never be enough at this point. But government is showing more commitment. I would say government is showing greater commitment than what we have had. Like I talked about Niger State, for instance. Niger State is planning to have about 1,000 tractors. And the last check, they were able to tell people that they were serious. About 100,000 people will be working on different farms. Even in Osun State, like I said earlier, the governor made commitment to bring in 100 tractors. From reports we've not, people said they have not seen it, but government said it has brought in about 70 tractors. That's unprecedented in Osun State. Ogun State, for instance, they are trying to double their rice output. So the combination of this effect, of these efforts, and will yield a lot of dividend, a lot of fruits. And I think the president also mentioned plans to bring in tractor in large numbers into the country very soon. I hope that one too will be actualized. In addition to that, there are also policy issues on food importation, essential food items. We are hoping that by the time all this come together, all these efforts, all these initiatives, by the time they come together, we begin to see the impact. Food inflation would eventually come down drastically. So we are waiting for what will happen in this current quarter. We hope the different stakeholders would continue to put in more effort than before to make sure that they sustain agricultural productivity this year.
Right. The fact is this conversation is not new, but inflation continues to rise in the country. And having identified the primary drivers of Nigeria's inflation, how can it be tamed?
Well, there is no two ways to it. And I will say this, quite unfortunately, there's no shortcut to. We have abandoned what we should do for 2-3 decades. All the tractors disappeared in the 80s. But why inflation grew drastically. So if you ask me, I would say we have excessive progression relative to our resources. And the only way to go about it at this point is to make sure that we apportion our resources in the most efficient way. And the way to do that also is to make sure that we place ample premium on productivity, manufacturing, agriculture, and infrastructure. So coming back to agriculture, we need to get to a point where we ask ourselves as a country, how many bags of fertilizers do we have? What's the quantity of fertilizer do we need? How do we get them? Even if we have to get them free of charge to farmers. That's one thing we must begin to subsidize. We must not begin to say there's free tractor service. I think they're doing that quite well in Burkina Faso and some African countries, where government is saying, we are going to give you mechanized services free of charge. We are going to give you almost everything you need just to come back to the farm. And in Nigerian context too, we'll begin to look at how much of security we have been able to provide, even for people who are willing to go back. So a combination of more investment in agriculture through mechanized farming, through provision of fertilizers and herbicides, and providing enough security to encourage people, or to make people have confidence to go back to the farm. These are key issues. Then when we are able to resolve those ones, begin to talk about infrastructure, getting the logistics right, ensuring each free movement of food produce from area of production to area of consumption, making sure that the farms are well connected to the farm. The farms are well connected to the markets. So these are the things we need to be looking at and begin to resolve one by one. The entire value chain has to be reviewed, evaluated, so that we ensure that people want to go to farm, go to farm. People on the farm are well protected, and people on the farm are well mobilized with tools, with all the necessary things to do so that we can have food production. There is really no way now. Nigeria has reached a point whereby the hold order cannot sustain Nigeria. The hold order would bring us to a dead end. So we must fight with all our zeal to make sure that we resist the temptation to be idle, we resist the temptation to stay idle and do nothing. We must begin to till the ground with all our zeal and all the resources which God has provided for this country.
So, Mr. Oyedeji, before we further dissect government's latest agriculture agenda, let me take you up on this. And this is based on the kinds of conversations we've seen on social media of recent. Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, largely due to its oil wealth. However, it faces competition from nations like South Africa and Egypt in other sectors such as technology and manufacturing. And many believe that understanding the structural differences can highlight opportunities for investment and growth in various industries. So, for you, as an economist, how does Nigeria's economic structure look compared to other African nations?
Well, over the years, we've relied too much on oil. And we've earned income, huge revenue from oil without planning and without using the resources, the revenue we got from oil judiciously. When you look at the structure of the economy, you see a lot of Nigerians are still not within areas where they can optimize the opportunities which they have or which the country we have as a people. We've relied too much on oil. We ran the economy to the point that we can only look at the oil resources when we have other things. We now need to begin to look at virtually every sector of the economy, look areas where we have surplus, deploy it to areas where we have deficits. We look at the subsidy regimes in different sectors where it's working, where it's not benefiting consumers, prove them where they should be. So the economy which we run now requires a lot of restructuring. That's what the reforms will be able to achieve. When you compare Nigeria with South Africa, for instance, you realize that South Africa has a lot of much more in service. The service sectors, industrial sectors, they yield a lot more for the economy than what we have in Nigeria. But those sectors are coming up. But the problem with Nigeria is that we must be able to develop virtually every sector of the economy at a good pace. And we must be able to run an economy that is self-reliant. That's one area where we have.
So, Mr. Oyedeji, I'm sorry, let me come in here. When you say we must restructure the economy, what exactly are we restructuring? And how do we begin? Where do we begin from?
Okay. Yeah, I was talking to a group of people a couple of hours ago, and I told them we have an estimated 140 million cell phones in Nigeria. And out of that 140 or 150 million cell phones, we probably don't have 5% of them produced in Nigeria. We have them from abroad. So we are too reliant on foreign supply. We are too reliant on foreign production of goods and services to help us to survive. That has to change drastically. It doesn't mean that we need to close the economy, then we'll produce 100% of what we have. We have to look at the area of strength where we have comparative advantage. I'll give you the case of Singapore. What Singapore has done the last 4 decades or thereabout is to look at the area of strength, and they focus very well on it. Singapore, for instance, doesn't have comparative advantage in agriculture. 90% of the food from Singapore, they get them from different parts of the world. But they've been able to identify their area of strength, and they've been able to develop those areas very well. Nigeria too must be able to do that. We have oil and gas. Over the years, we got surplus. We allowed that to be spirited out of the system. We need to now look at agriculture. How do we get the surplus, migrate the surplus from oil and gas to develop agriculture massively? How do we develop the public system, the schools, the infrastructure, getting everything working? And these things are not secrets. They are known to policymakers. They are known to implementing those policies. But one thing we lack over the years is just the determination to be true to ourselves, the determination to have a scheme and to follow that scheme in the most decent and disciplined manner. We've not had that over the years. And that's one area where there's nothing hidden about how to run the economy in Nigeria. What we have is just the will, the sincerity, the honesty to make sure that we get the economy back to shape.
Well, I mean, when you say what we lack is the determination to be true to ourselves, I wanted to ask if this also involves the CBN, because the Apex Bank has deployed several monetary policy tools and instruments to achieve price stability. And despite the deployment of monetary policy tools, the inflationary pressure has persisted. Are you on the same page with those who say to succeed, the CBN must independently pursue inflation goals? What does that mean in a layman language?
Well, if you look at what CBN has brought out almost all the tricks in the books, from adjusting the monetary policy rate, from checking virtually everything that can be done. But you see, one thing is missing. If you look at the circular flow of income in Nigeria, one thing that will not make CBN work to yield the desired results are the leakages which you have within the economy. The level of rent taking is still very high. And when you have rent taking, you have corruption, you have rent taking, you're not likely to get any results. So that's one area where we've not been able to address appropriately. What do you mean by rent taking, for instance? Me people getting rewarded more than the effort they put into it. The bulk of that comes from the public sector. Well, it is almost a given, for instance, that 2-3 days after the federation account has hit different accounts of the subnationals, the exchange rate will go up immediately. Why? Because those who are in charge are the ones. I don't want to make unfounded claims on the national TV, but the reality is that bulk of the money we need to service our commitment abroad on a private level from those in government, especially at the subnationals. So as long as you have that level of leakages, you have that level of migration of funds from the real sector into private accounts, into things that don't count, we'll continue to struggle with the exchange rates. I will give you another example. If you have, before we used to think, oh, if we ban rice importation, Naira will gain value immediately. But we've tried that in this country and it did not work. What the quantity of rice a community in a state like Osho State will consume rice from abroad is probably lower than what a big man in Nigeria will spend bringing in one SUV. So you have to begin to look at these things one by one. The leakages within the economy are making the job of the CBN very difficult. And don't forget that over the years, in the last 4 or 5 decades, we have struggled so much to use the little oil resources we have to sustain the value of the Naira. We did that to a point last year where we did not even have the resources to sustain the value of the Naira. So what we have now, what the CBN has decided to do now is to let the Naira have its own life. Let the market forces determine a whole lot of things within the system. And as long as we continue that, we'll begin to face the reality of what the Naira is. The reality of
Mr. Oyedeji, talking about leakages, Mr. Oyedeji, talking about leakages, because this is something very dear to Mr. President. What more can the president do to block leakages?
Well, I've said repeatedly how complicated our federalism is. It makes it very difficult for a president to be in Abuja and have effective control of what happens at all tiers of government. It's a very difficult thing. And the president, for instance, can control what happens within the federal system, at the federal government level, I mean. But he cannot control the expenditure pattern of the subnationals. He's trying to even bring a bit of sanity into the relationship between the federal and the local government. I mean, the federation and the local government, trying to say, oh, let's give them financial autonomy and go. There's a little to which you can do, and that manifests in different forms. You have people who are rewarded beyond the value they put into the economy. It can happen through inflated contracts. They are not illegitimate, but the value put into such contract is lower than the reward which the contractor will get. That's rent taking. You have people who occupy a small office as a councillor of an area, and within that municipal, what that office draws from the resources is higher than the services which that revenue head can provide. That's rent taking. You have a local government chairman, for instance, who was poor like every other person on the street. He became local government chairman and he will begin to buy houses all over the street. That's a problem. The money is not coming from anything other than what should have gone into healthcare, what should have gone into road maintenance. So you have to look at it, a complicated system. And, there is no firm control from the top that can compel the subnationals, that can compel the local government, the ward, the municipals, the state to do what is right or to determine their revenue and the expenditure profile.
All right, so let's talk about one of the latest moves by the agency of governments. The Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has given 1 month moratorium to traders and other market stakeholders involved in exploitative pricing to crash the prices of goods. What impact will this make in price stability? Is it really about asking traders to crash food prices?
Well, it's somehow laughable, and we will await the chairman of the commission to furnish the public with further details of how it will achieve that. It's laughable, to be honest. You see, what government can do is to continue to use policies to determine market trend and market situation. It's not by threats. You see how much of policy, how much of policies can be used, can be deployed to influence the interplay of market forces, demand and supply. If you have adequate supply of goods and services, market forces will do the proper regulation, and you don't need to threaten people and bring them to the market square like we had about 100 years ago. I know in some communities in the Southwest, for instance, traditional rulers are compelling people to stop cartelization, telling them, no, don't form association that would dictate price. It's not just at the market level. Industries are doing the same thing. And I will tell you what they do. You reduce your output and increase your price. You reduce output, you reduce the quantity produced. I'm talking about big manufacturing outfits now, not just the market trader on the street. If, for instance, we are producing 1,000 units of soap, you decide to reduce it to 400 or 600 or 700, and you increase your price, you still make the same level of profits. So they are tinkering with those things. They are doing more and making less. Why are they able to do that? Because the level of production within the economy is very low. And the same thing is taken to the grassroots now, where market traders, trade unions are doing cartelization. They will tell their members, please, don't sell below this price. The Association of Tailors, the Association of all kinds of associations are taking advantage of the people. And that's an indication of how bad things have gone in the last 8 years or 9 years or thereabouts. And, if you don't have adequate supply, people will take advantage of the market.
So, Mr. Oyedeji, you're very convinced that this will not work.
I would rather say it's unnecessary. Okay. I would rather prefer that they continue to look at how to boost supply of essential items so that the market forces can practically do the rest, can be more effective. If you have, for instance, the economy needs 20 quantities of rice, for instance, and you're able to get 10, then the owners of those come together and say, this is they will fix price, they will do fixing. But when your economy needs 20 quantity of rice, for instance, and the government is able to provide 21 or facilitate the production from different quarters of 21, there's adequate supply, then everybody begins to compete. Then the price will begin to come down. But as long as you have shortage of supply of essential items, there'll be cartelization, there'll be price fixing, then there'll be manipulation, and they have all the opportunities to undermine the market.
All right. So I'm very sure we'll continue this conversation some other time. I've been speaking with Kayode Oyedeji. Thank you so much for your time tonight as we discuss the Nigerian economy with focus on the big drivers of inflationary trend. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching, everyone. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But you can watch the repeat broadcast of this episode at midnight. Get in touch with us at our social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, and X.